Hi, this is Brian Russell with Walking and Talking Spirituality. Thanks for taking a walk with me. And this week I've returned to two of my favorite writers from the ancient world, Seneca and Epictetus. Highly recommend Seneca's letters from a Stoic and Epictetus's discourses, or if you want the shorter read, read his Enchiridion. And these are both probably two of the big three of the so-called classical Stoic authors. And what's interesting is they're contemporaries essentially of the Apostle Paul. Seneca was a contemporary. Seneca died under Nero in the mid-70s, just a little bit after Paul would have died at the hands of the Romans. And Epictetus was just a few years later. He lived into the 2nd century. But I love the Stoics because they have a key principle that I think is critical for our lives as Christians too. The core principle of Stoicism is recognizing the difference between what we can control and what's external to ourselves, and thinking critically about the choices that we make whenever we actually move into a realm where we have no control over. For example, what do we have no control over today? We literally have no control over the spread of the coronavirus, essentially, right? I mean, there's things we can do, but as we've seen in the news, there's really no guarantee that we might not catch it, right? So that's something that we really have out of our control ultimately. We can't control what is happening politically. We can't control what happens in the world. We can't control the stock market. We can't control if our best friend is having a bad day. We can't control if somebody gets sick. And you can just make the list on, but think of all the things that tend to trouble us in our lives. And most of those things are literally outside of our control. Now, Stoicism isn't about putting your head in the sand either. Because instead, it's just, again, about recognizing the importance of what we put our focus on. If we put our focus on all of the crazy things that are happening around us, should be no surprise that we get really troubled. Maybe our blood pressure goes up. We can feel angry and anxious and uncertain all the time. But what Stoicism actually reminds us is that we need to focus on that inner circle of control. And what is it that I can always control? This is where I think the Christian message really comes in. I can focus on my deep spiritual formation so that I have a base and a foundation on which to actually engage these external things that trouble everyone, but I can do it from a position of peace and serenity. So what is it that I can control? I can control my focus. Where focus goes, energy flows. I can control what I put in my body as far as the food that I put in my body. I can control my commitments to making sure that I get adequate sleep whenever possible, that I'm fueling myself with scripture, with contemplative practices, with reading great books, with making sure that I'm doing my journaling practices and all the things that I put into my rule of life. That gives me that inner fortitude. So then, again, this is probably where a Christianity is going to differ a little bit with Stoicism, because Christianity, we believe in a God that's guiding the world to a beautiful, abundant future. We know that ultimately love wins. God's got this. All we have to do then is show up, pay attention, because God's got way more invested in the outcome than we do. So when we build and focus on our own formation, rather than be continuously distracted, angered, annoyed, frustrated by everything that's going around us, we can actually show up and be missionally effective. Again, I love reading the Stoics. Again, the same time as Christianity was exploding, the Stoics were writing, and they lived in a crazy world just like the earliest Christians did, and they found a way to focus on what they can control. And friends, what about you? Do you spend most of your time focusing on or railing against or being troubled by all of the things around us that basically got everybody fired up, have everybody divided? Or are you focusing on becoming a world-changing disciple maker who can move out of a core of love because in our inner game, we find our true identity as persons loved by God? That puts us in the best position to engage the world and be Jesus' hands, feet, and mouthpieces. And that's just a little lesson that I learned this week from, again, reviewing Seneca and Epictetus. Again, don't get me wrong, they don't say one thing about Jesus. It's debatable whether they even knew who he was. But when you read it, that key principle, very compatible with our faith, with the key difference that we can trust ultimately that God has our best interests at heart and that he's got this. If you'd like to have a conversation, reach out to me, deepdivespirituality@gmail.com. You can also check out my brand new website, brianrussellphd.com. Until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be voices of hope in the world.